All right, today here we're with Connor Strapp. He's a seasoned sales veteran. He cut his teeth starting as a BDR and Insight Software and working his way into AE and then VP all the way up to Senior Divisional Vice President of Sales. Before heading up VP of Sales at Rossum and then Lang.ai, where they were a customer of Warmly's. And that's how we first got in contact. Connor, it's good to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks, Alan. Great to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to talk more about your journey from BDR to VP. It seems like you made it up there really fast, and we'd love to hear some lessons along the way.
Sure. Okay, I guess just a quick background. So I tripped and fell into sales outside of college. So my sister actually worked at a company called Global Software, which became Insight Software later, and I started as a BDR there. I was there for about 7 years, and along that 7 years, we grew the business from around 10 million in annual revenue to over 500 million in annual revenue. And intentionally hopped around teams at Insight Software and led different types of teams. So account executives, account managers, BDRs, and got a flavor for the mid-market, the enterprise, and several different areas of B2B SaaS selling. And ultimately, I left because when we hit that milestone and I did some reflecting, I was the most passionate and energized along the way when we were in the building phase of the company versus the more maintaining phase. Like when I started at Global, we had desktop computers, we had Salesforce, and we had a phone with a cord. There was no sales process. There was no tech stack outside of Salesforce. So we implemented all of that along the 10 to 500 million journey. And in talking to other folks, like a lot of people are in that similar boat. So I wanted to take what I learned there and apply it at other companies. And then also tripped and fell into AI over these past 2 years. And it was a lucky trip, but I've learned a lot in the AI space, and it's obviously booming now. But yeah, here we are.
That's awesome. And it seems like you have a lot to give back to the community as well in terms of what you learned, especially in the sales process. So once you left Insight, what kind of processes did you institute at Rossum and Lang? And then how did you maintain control of the organization?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest, everybody always talks about it, but one of the most influential things that have been implemented at orgs are the medic and medpic qualification methodology. I think it's really important that an entire org is speaking the same language within the sales teams, and medic and medpic give you the ability to do that. So if I think about before the medic days, everybody would talk about their deals in like a check-in forecast call, and they would say, yeah, this is the decision maker, the signer, those things are synonymous, when in reality they're not. Or they may be calling somebody a champion, but they're really not a champion, or they're just calling it somebody that's enthused about the product, or they really liked the demo and the next step is X, but they're not thinking about the next step in Y or Z, or thinking about how the typical deal plays out within their organization and how they can try to maintain control of that process from start to finish to the best of their ability. I mean, every deal is different, but most of the time you can find a lot of similarities, and you can find a path from A to Z that is the most efficient and also the most helpful for the buyer as they tend to navigate your sales process and evaluate your product. So, and when I say that, the speaking the same language piece, it's interesting when you start at a new organization, there's a lot of managing to it, like saying someone calls it a decision maker, and you say, no, we're talking about the economic buyer. And this is the person that actually has the authority to release budget, not just signer and economic buyer are not the same thing. You have to manage to these things, but it's really cool to see them start to stick and have everybody, again, speaking the same language as you're talking about your deals, and you can collaborate on them better that way, in my opinion.
Got it. Got it. So it's really standardizing who's an economic buyer, who are the buyer, like all these naming conventions that kind of become nebulous. If you don't get unified, then you start speaking different languages, and all of a sudden the process starts to break down. So that seems to be step one. Any other steps in between to get from A to Z that you think are worth calling out?
Yeah, what I really like about Medic is that it gives you a framework to understand what you're missing in your deal. So anybody that's ever worked with me has heard me say time and time again, it's not a bad thing to have gaps, to have medic gaps. I would say it's actually
Hmm.
um, it's common to have medic gaps until you're at the finish line. But in using that framework and talking through deals, it helps you at least identify where those gaps are in medic. So you can put a plan in place
Hmm.
to start to address them and fill them. So I guess back to your question, when you think A to Z, you have your framework, you do your disco or whatever your first step is, you start to get some of the pain, you start to maybe touch on some of the metrics, but you then do the demo, you start to loop in additional stakeholders. Are we sure we know who the economic buyer
Hmm.
is? Are we starting to develop a champion? Do we think they're a
Hmm.
true champion? And as you're talking about it, you can start to challenge these things and say, okay, maybe I don't have a legitimate champion, and that's a massive risk
Mm.
to the deal that's
Hmm.
in place right now. But so what? What do we do about it? We can go and look throughout the org to find that champion, and we can still leverage the person that we're working with. But in this one example, maybe they don't have the influence, and we need to go a step up and put a plan in to do that.
So this topic of champions is really fascinating because it's it often is the case. It's the first point of contact within an organization, and then that could completely screw you over if you find the wrong person because they want everything to go through them. But in
Mm.
reality, the number of buyers that make a decision or the number of decision makers have increased over time. So by choke pointing at one person, you're causing yourself a disservice. And so, like, talk to me a little bit more about this whole champions play and what you guys have done there.
Well, yeah, and you're talking about multi-threading too. And I mean, look, every deal is different. Like sometimes if you have a transactional type product, you can get a deal done with one person and it takes a week or a month or
Hmm.
whatever it may be. But if we're going to frame this in the context of semi-complex or complex deal cycles, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have multiple stakeholders within the deal. And what you just said was interesting too about like getting pigeonholed and always wanting to go through that same person. But again, if I get stuck in that spot, that for me would have me starting to think about, is this deal even legitimate if this one
Mm.
person is holding on to their ego so much that they don't want us to talk to anybody else? Because
Hmm.
again, a true champion would want to do anything and everything to sell on your behalf and to get the deal moving forward. And if they're trying to safeguard you from other people, then they're doing the opposite of that. So I actually think
Right.
when you ask the question about what is, or just tell me more about this champion building type thought process, at that point in time, that to me would be a test that a champion had failed and signaled to me that we need to look elsewhere, in my
Then
opinion.
how do you tell if you have a good champion? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that as soon as if you're early in your sales career, you might not know what it looks like, but as soon as you find your first true champion, you know exactly what you're looking for moving forward. It's simple things like,
Mhm.
are they responsive to your outreach? Do they give you their cell phone number and you guys text? Are they going to hop on a call at 6, 7 p.m. their time because there's something urgent needed for a deadline tomorrow or whatever it may be? Are they prepping you before big meetings that will influence the sales process? Are they willing to, at the beginning of a meeting with multiple people involved, actually set the stage for the entire group and say, listen, everybody, here's why we're here. Here's the impact that it can have for us. And then I'll pass it over to Alan and he'll go through the demo, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
So those are the type of things that when you have a champion, they're excited to do that and they're really personally invested in the success of the project that you're working on.
Yeah. And how do you can you convert someone who's not a champion into a champion, or do they just start off that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think they certainly are converted over time. There's some things that just cannot be true. Like a champion has to have influence and authority within the organization and specifically with the economic buyer. So that's something that can't change quickly and that you really can't
Mhm.
influence. But on day one, like a champion's not going to be there. They have to be developed through your sales process. So That's not to say that a champion can't be like an individual contributor. I've seen analysts that have been involved in deal
Mhm.
cycles that have been um, genuine champions, but they've worked there for 7 years and they have the ear of the CFO or CEO, and they have a really trusted opinion within the org. So I don't want people to mistake having influence and authority as having a big title. That's not always true, but they certainly need to at least have, you know, the gravitas to get things done. As far as developing them, I mean, you got to think when they first come through the door, they're definitely not a champion, and through your discovery, they're going to become a champion if you can find a really large pain that's going to, you know, either help their organization increase revenue, decrease cost, or mitigate risk. And if you can find a pain like that that is legitimate, that they want to solve and is a priority for them to solve, then they're going to start to float to your side of the table.
That's a great point. And what kind of champion have you developed a champion development playbook that you can institute and pass from one organization to the next? What would your advice be for developing something like that for other VPs of sales?
Hmm. I haven't. I mean, there's a lot of blogs and material out there on champion building. I'm not sure that there's a playbook. Um, I would say, like, I would actually just keep it very simple. Playbook might overcomplicate it. If you think about champion building, it's three things. It's
Mhm.
that they have the ability and influence within the org. That's almost a checkbox that you want to try to understand. You want to see that they're actively selling on your behalf. So those are things like I mentioned within the meeting, you know, doing setting the stage within the meeting, introducing other stakeholders, and then you want to make sure that they have a personal vested interest in getting the deal done. Is this something that's going to get them a bonus? Are they going to get promoted? Is it just going to make them look good? Is it going to help their team be more successful? It has to affect them personally. So if you use those three things as a benchmark, I wouldn't overcomplicate it. I would just play to those three bullet points.
Oh, that makes sense. Um, let's shift over to hiring for a second. So, how do you hire some of the best talent on the team? What is your hiring strategy to get the best sales folks?
That's a great question. And it's something I'm really passionate about. So, the one thing that I truly believe is that high potential candidates are typically the best candidates. Now, that's not to take away from people that are experienced in any given field or industry, but there are so many people out there that are worth giving a shot to that don't get it because the job description says they need 5 years of SaaS selling or they need to have sold to the enterprise.
Mhm.
And look, again, my caveat is sometimes in some companies, some products, like the industry and domain knowledge is very important. But I found that if you can find people that have the soft traits like general intelligence, creativity, and work ethic, a very strong work ethic, and if they are personally motivated by something big, then they can be taught most things industry and product wise. I mean, this isn't B2B SaaS isn't rocket science
Mhm.
as much as people would really like to think that it is. You can teach those things, but you can't teach intelligence. You can't teach creativity. You can't teach
Mhm.
work ethic. And you can't teach somebody to be personally motivated and to have these huge goals. So, those are the four things that I look for. And some of the best reps that I've worked with have come from restaurants, have come from roofing sales, have come from car
Mhm.
sales, have just come straight out of college and didn't even know that they wanted to be in sales like myself. But I guess so. One more thing on top of that is that they need to be extremely coachable, and they actually need to put
Yep.
the coaching into practice. So a lot of people can be coachable and they take coaching and feedback well, but if they don't actually put it into practice, then it doesn't make sense. So I would modify what I said from 4 to 5 things.
Is there a rank order in which you say this is absolutely a priority? I mean, for me personally, it's motivation, and I totally agree with all these counts, like intelligence, general. Most things, actually, including engineering, can also be taught. Some of the best engineers came from absolutely no background. I remember there was this kid who was who was homeless, and then he taught himself engineering by going to the library, and that's how he learned algorithms. Then became one of the first engineers at Pandora, and now he started his own credit card company.
Yeah.
So even the most complex topics can be taught, and it's really like the meta stuff that you can't teach, but that becomes the X factor. So for me, it's motivation, but curious how you stack rank that list even further.
Yeah. Before I answer that, I'm curious to hear on your side, like, what's the coolest motivator you've heard from somebody?
Motivator,
Like they said,
like why were they so motivated?
like if you take the person that was homeless and learned coding, why did they do it? Was it, well, I mean, that one might be an obvious one. They don't want to be homeless anymore. But is there
Mm-hmm.
a why that
Mm-hmm.
somebody has told you they're working towards, which gets them excited and motivated every day, that really made you be like, wow, okay, that's cool. That's a cool story.
Yeah, it's for me personally, it's typically things that um, they want to do something fantastic with their life. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but they want to do great things. They want to be extremely ambitious. Some of the best people on the team right here, like I'll take Derek for example. Derek is our senior growth manager. He's only been working here for 2 years, but he and I, we are almost at the same, like you said, intelligence level at this point, and I'm already almost a decade ahead. He is extremely motivated to learn quickly, absorb, and get a lot of stuff done because he wants to start a company one day. And so
Yeah.
the way he thinks now is that of an owner. He doesn't think like I just need to get tasks done. He thinks every day is like for my own personal burn rate. Every single day is a sprint. And because of that, we throw the most nebulous problems at him now. He understands that we only have this much time before we hit, drop dead date. And so working backwards, here's what I need to do every single day. And we've given him the freemium project. He killed freemium. Now we're giving him the nebulous product project, which I can discuss a different time. But it's yeah, simple questions would be like, what is what do you where do you want to go with your life? What do you want to do? And then you look at the history of, let's say, their LinkedIn profile. What have they done up until this point? Because the past is one of the best predictors of the future. So those two things, past and then where they want to go. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. I really like it when people have a very specific motivator. So, like with the person you're talking about, they want to start a company one day. That's a great motivation. I would even want to know more, like, why do they want to start a company? But there's always one that
Mm-hmm.
comes to mind for me. There's somebody I've worked with at multiple companies who flat out told me on day one when I was asking about his motivation, he's like, I like sailing. I don't like selling software at all. Like I sales is
Mm.
not like my bread and butter, but I love sailing and sales. I know I'm good at it. And I think that it's my quickest path to wealth creation so that I can focus on sailing. So here's my 5 year plan on how I'm going to go buy a sailboat. Here's how I'm going to
Oh.
give myself a skill set that's going to allow me to do some fractional work while I'm on the water. And look, I will be the best employee for you for the next 3 to 5 years, whatever it may be. But I want you to help me crush these goals so I can leave you in 3 to 5 years. And like, it was so clear cut. Having that very specific goal and motivation
Yeah.
was impressive. And also, I guess in that example too, kind of cool that you can be that transparent and honest about things, because most people aren't going to say like, hey, I'm working to leave. But
Right.
I don't care. Like, you put in solid work for 3 to 5 years and reach your goals, more power to you. That's amazing. But that is one very specific goal about what someone's going to achieve. Like, they're thinking about it in not if I'm going to do this, but I am going to do this and here's how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to use the sales profession to help me achieve this.
That's really interesting. Just imagine if that person, his calling was sales. Then how far can you go? What I mean, is there the best people that you've worked with in the sales? Have they been people like him, or have they been people like I just love the art of sales and I want to get better at it? I don't do it for the money anymore. I do it for the game.
Both. Yeah, I don't think that's binary by any means. They both, or they're different, but
Hmm.
have both been successful for sure. I do think that like if you don't have that big why out there, it is really important to be passionate about your profession and your job. Because if you don't have that, then
Hmm.
it's going to feel like a chore versus the way I feel about it.
Hmm. How with a lot of layoffs going on in the market right now, what can people who are looking for a job in sales, what can they do to differentiate themselves?
Good question. It's again, and this might be a very simple answer, but it still amazes me the amount of people that don't reach out to the hiring manager when they're in the funnel. And I
Hmm.
would say, so that should always be a must. Two, if you're in the interview process, sending really thoughtful follow up notes, not just, hey, thank you for your time, but hey, thank you for your time. Here's what I learned in our conversation. Here's a couple follow up questions, show that creativity. And here's what I see are next steps, whatever it may be, but make sure it's thoughtful. You can even use ChatGPT to help you with the copy itself, but make sure you're taking notes so you can send those follow up emails. And then networking and being intentional about networking is very important. I think every job I've ever had came from knowing somebody within the org. I've never applied somewhere and then,
Mm.
entered into the interview process and gotten the gig. Um, and when I think about most of the people I've hired, that's true as well. There's some sort of referrals that had an in the company. So the thing about networking is that you just have to be intentional about it too. And you have to carve out time like anything else to put yourself out there and meet people. You can do it on LinkedIn. You can do it in your local city. There's
Hmm.
tons of groups like Pavilion out there where you can meet folks, but I guess another thing about networking too is that you're going into it without a specific ask and everyone's trying to help each other. So you're just getting to know people and that can land you a good gig much quicker than just
Hmm.
applying. Um, other folks that have been laid off, things to help. Things to help get the job.
That's another one.
Well, no, I was just thinking about it outside of those three things. I would just say too, like in this environment, be if you can financially afford to do so, be picky too, because there's so many stories that I've heard about someone gets laid off and then they join a company and 3 months later they get laid off again. So actually getting detailed and understanding what the
Hmm.
company's goals are and if they have product market fit, you can ask to talk to some customers. You can even go on their website and see who they're flaunting as their
Yeah.
customers and find them on LinkedIn and reach out. But try to be picky and land a spot that you're confident that you'll be successful with.
I think that's a really great point because when you get laid off, I mean, the first instinct is I had this worldview that I would eventually evolve into, and then it just got shaken up, and it's like the carpet got dragged past my feet, and now I have no idea what's going on. I should probably just get a job immediately. But what you
Mhm.
said is really important because if you get another job and then you get laid off for various reasons, even outside of your own control because the company wasn't doing well, then you're actually in a worse off position than you were before. And
Yeah.
so, what are what are some ways to figure out whether or not a company has product market fit is a really interesting question. That if you had anything more to talk about here, it'd be really interesting to hear because it's I think it's really important
Yeah,
given
let
the
me park that
environment as
one real
well.
quick and then go to the choosing the right company thing for a second too, because there was something there. I had a
Hmm.
conversation last week where this came up about layoffs and getting laid off again, and
Hmm.
maybe this could help somebody. Understanding the basic unit economics of an organization and a sales org, if we're talking about a specific uh, sales specifically, because this person I was talking to, and I won't name names for obvious reasons, but they were, let me try to
Okay.
remember the numbers. They had a sales team of roughly 15 to 20 reps, about the same amount of BDRs, several leaders layered
Hmm.
on top of those. And they had grown last year organically from, I don't know, let's just call it like 5 to 7. Let's call it $2 million dollars in net new revenue. And they're continuing to hire and hire and hire. And I started asking them about their customer acquisition costs and if there were any concerns about having to reduce costs going down the road. Because if you think about that size of a sales organization where you're talking about dozens and dozens of people producing only $2 million dollars in net new revenue, that is the exact recipe that has led to all of these growth stage companies having these layoffs. So, and of course, they were trying to convince me, hey, there's no risk of this. We're continuing to invest in the team. But that mentality can shift just like that as soon as a board member starts to get cold feet and the cash reserves start depleting a little bit more. So I guess, again, just to summarize that, basic unit economics of the sales org, try to understand that. And you can do some Googling on what those best in class metrics look like. And they don't have to be perfect. But in this example, it was so out of whack. Like, I can almost guarantee that company will have a layoff within the next 6 to 12 months unless things change. On product market fit, this is one that I think everybody's still trying to figure out. But for me,
You
I
need
think
investor if you could figure it out. Yeah.
you have to talk to customers that are extremely delighted about the solution and they're raving fans. And again, you can ask the company for those customer references and they'll give them to you likely, and they might be raving fans, but of course they're going to give you the 2 or 3 that are the most excited about the product. If you want to hear the true, genuine feedback, try to back channel some other users that aren't being provided to you that can come from logos on the website, but also you can ask the customers that they provided who are some other users and just do some Googling and see if you can find some other customers to talk to. And then the other thing on product market fit is somebody can be a raving fan, but if it's not a need to have within an organization or it's not making an impact to revenue, costs, or risk, then you have a nice to have solution. And then that's also risky of being on the chopping block when there's when budget cuts are needed within the org. So I think hearing it from the customers and then making sure that there's a tangible ROI that can be defended when you're in the room with the CFO are what's important when you think about product market fit, in my mind. Would you add anything to that?
And whether you could scale it.
Yeah. And if it's growing.
Yeah, and whether it can be a big business, and yeah, if it's profitable, all the small metrics as well. Yeah. If you can compete, there's so many things to product market fit, because you can easily just copy a product and you'll have product market fit because the market's already there.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, like you would be building a need to have just by making a ventilator. But does that mean you're going to be a big business? It means you'll be able to sell, but can you compete? So I was just thinking about, like, you could probably get to 1 million, but can it be a venture backable? Like, can you scale past a certain amount? Is there a way to compete? And that goes to the next topic probably, which is how do you have the entire organization involved in sales? Like, how do you make sure you win the market? I'd love to hear your ideas and perspective on this.
I think the biggest thing on this one is just a culture that's instilled from the top and that's reminded and it's brought up constantly. Because there is, like, you can have the best sales org in the world, but if the product doesn't work or it's not solving a pain, the sales aren't going to come. If nobody knows about your logo and brand, it's going to be much more difficult to scale. And there's going to be a higher CAC because you're going one-to-one versus one-to-many. If you have a really horrible customer service department and your customers have a horrible experience, they're going to continue to churn and you're going to have to backfill that churn. So every piece of the org needs to work and needs to think that they're responsible for sales in some sense. And I don't think there's any way to do that outside of having a really fantastic CEO that continues to push that aspect of it. The opposite of it would be continuing to point the finger at sales whenever targets aren't being hit. Sales might be, there are probably improvements that can be made in the sales department, but it's not the only symptom. There are other symptoms within the org. Some things that, like, you can practically see happening within an organization. You should be able to get your VP of product engineering on a sales call if they're needed for whatever reason. You should be able to get your CEO on a sales call, again, depending on the size of the org. A senior leader on the sales call if it's juicy enough and there's a reason for them to be there. Everybody should always be willing to hop in on a sales call if it's valuable, and should have that sense of ownership that sales is not just a sales problem.
Yeah, especially when you're small. It's
Yeah.
not you're an engineer, I'm a marketer. We're all in sales. Everyone, taught janitor, everyone's in sales. Totally agree there.
And everybody has a network
Connor, it has
too.
been
So like
fantastic. Yep,
I was going to say,
yep,
everybody has a network too. Like I love seeing company
yep,
wide shifts where it's like, hey, reach out to your connections. And if you can bring something
yeah.
in, like, here's a couple bucks or whatever it may be. But everybody has a network, even if it's your aunt's best friend that, works for Smithfield's barbecue,
Mm,
but lives next door to the CEO of Brex or something. Like there's things that everyone can do, even if they don't have sales chops or don't feel comfortable actually in a selling environment. There are things to do.
yeah, everyone has an extended network resource, but we're not all tapping into it, which is the unfortunate thing. You rely on the Rolodex of the salespeople. That's not necessarily all you have.
Right.
So totally agree with that. Connor, it's been fantastic having you on here. Thank you so much. What can the viewers do to help you out for all your good advice and wisdom?
I don't know about all that, but just connect with me on LinkedIn. Love to have a conversation and yeah,
Cool.
shoot me a note if there's anything I can help with.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the time, man.
Thanks, Alan. See you.
See you.